Alright, this is an analysis of the shim diagram on the VFR750. I'm going to give you some advice real quick. To shim, to do a valve job, meaning to measure it, to remove it, and to re-shim it or correct the clearance is going to take about 6 hours. And in addition to that, it is extremely confusing. And the reason that it's confusing, and I'll go through this, and I'll tell you my experience. I replaced all the valves, all these valves, every single valve, all 16 valves were replaced. All the springs were replaced. All the oil seals were replaced. I swapped out the rear because I didn't know if the upper head gasket was damaged or not, and it turned out to be a little bit damaged. So what I did was I took the rear head gasket and I put it in the front so that I could change it real quick if it started to present a problem. The rear upper head, just to remove it will take you an entire day. And that's coming from somebody that that can really, move these parts around pretty quickly. Dropping the engine out of it, I just don't think it's worth dropping the engine out of it. But just to re-shim it will take you at least 6 hours, and I'm going to go through and tell you why. In my case, I had to start fresh, meaning that the shims were completely off. I could not get the crank to turn in a 360 revolution. So when I put the shims back and I cranked it, it would bind, and it just stuck there. And I could tell that it was too tight. And if you keep on going when you do that, you're going to break something. You're going to break the valve, or you're going to break something, so you don't want to damage it. You want to stop. I took the shim out, and I figured out it was just things just got too wacky. So if you take the bucket out and take the shim out, you can turn it in a 360. And but you got to first find out which one's doing it before you break something. And to do that, you look at the T1, T2, T3, or T4. In my case, it was on the T2. It was binding. It couldn't move any further. I tried putting some force on it. I knew it was stuck, so I looked at the T2 and I saw that it was not opening. Took the bucket out, it turned. Okay. I would highly recommend you do a diagram, and this is the diagram. But here's the problem. This was my first one. See, it says upper head shim diagram chart. This got me totally confused because if you take a look at it, it says the front here with the intake and the exhaust. Here's the rear. This is the rear one here. That's the intake and the exhaust. The only problem is that on a V4 you have opposing cylinder heads. So the intake faces this way on the rear, and on the front the intake faces this way. So when you look at this diagram, you can't tell which direction you're looking at. In other words, this has to be flipped this way. This has to be looking forward like this. So you're looking forward as this way, and this way you're looking this way. So you can't go from any chart that I did. Man, it took me literally 3 days just to do all this stuff. 3 to 4 days. Then with all my shims, I had to carbon fiber my shims just to see. I had to carbon fiber them just to get them into a range where I could work with. Okay, so it was a tremendous amount. It was a tremendous amount of work when I replaced all the internal parts. And in addition to that, you can't reuse each upper head has its own cams and its own followers. So you can't swap the cams out, and you can't swap the parts. Now the valves, the springs, and the seals you can, but anything else like the camshafts you can't do. Now this is a chart that I really like, and here is an example of a smaller one. It shows two of them, exactly how it would if you're looking at it. So on the front you're looking at the exhaust, and then if you're looking at it, it's the intake on the top, exhaust on the bottom. If you're looking at the rear, you got the intake on the bottom and you got the exhaust on the rear. Then you have two out here, which shows you that you can measure the shim, or you can measure the difference, as I have right here. This is the difference, and you go by these differences. If it's loose, you write down loose, and then you write down the difference that it's loose. In this case, I'm going for 20 millimeter. My difference is 15 on both of these, so I have 15 loose. I know to take my shim, subtract 15 out of it. And, you know, in this case again, I'm measuring it at 53 millimeters, and my bench is 15 millimeters loose. So I'm subtracting 53 millimeters, 53 off my shim. That's an incredible amount. But that shows you some of the stuff that I am, you know, so this is a, you know, these, it only took me 3 times. My micrometer ran out of batteries. I started getting crazy ass numbers. So also replace the battery on your measuring tool. I also made carbon fiber shims, and they work pretty good. Glue and stuff doesn't work, but carbon fiber, when you compress it to 1,000 pounds, it's almost like steel. They don't separate. They work. No problems whatsoever with the carbon fiber shims. Now, it's just you got to get it exactly the size. And I got a video on how to do that now. So this is the graphical representation. When it's all said and done, each one of these sheets right here is 6 hours. 6 hours here, 6 hours here. Making your own shims, 24 hours to make your own shims. If you order it, it takes 7 days to arrive. So, you know, I don't know. In this case, I've got so many variations that I'm not buying them. I am not buying them because I can't even get this thing to turn in a 360 rotation. So I'm hit and missing just to get it to rotate. Now, how I did it was lowball it. I got a 1.2 shim. I ordered them 1.2 shim, and then I benched it from there, and that's where this 53 comes in. That's a 1.2 shim. Now, that's just to get it so that it would turn in a circle. Now, this is my final. So each of these is 6 hours. That's 18 hours right there. Now, when I took this one out, I was just swapping them, and I accidentally, you know, swapped them in the wrong one. So I put this one in here and this one in here, and therefore it threw my clearance off completely. It still passed clearance, but it's not exactly and perfect like I want it. So I've got this one indicating that there's a problem with the two intakes on the front. No, excuse me, 2 intakes on the rear, and I'm swapping the 2 shims here so that they are the ones that I did previously. So I gotta swap this one, and on this one I measured out at 8 millimeter. I measured it at 8 millimeter, and the difference, because it's an intake, I'm benching it at 15 millimeters. My difference is 7 millimeters, so I'm taking whatever shim I have in here, the 2.15, minus the difference of 7 millimeters, and I'm coming out with a 2.08, which I have right here in the bucket. Okay, so when it's all said and done, my final variables with new valves and new springs and new internals. Now, you can't really, you can't sand down your camshafts. You have to measure out your camshaft lobes and stuff. Those are really, man, you can't do anything with them. You can't swap them. They have to go in exactly how you took them out. So here's the final analysis. The final analysis was on these heads, the shims were between 2.8 and 2.12. So they were between 2.8, 2.6 to 2.12, very high up there in the twos. My final analysis, 2.12, 2.16, 1.90, 1.97. That's on the rear exhaust. And that's a bench of 20 millimeters. All of these are set to 20 millimeters, but they show you the variances when you lap the valves. On the intake, I have a 2, a 197, 2.3, and a 2.05. My carbon fiber ones were worthless. The only carbon fiber one that I ended up using was a 2.17, 2.15. I don't know what this one is. I don't remember what it was. And I don't remember what this one was, but it's in the ballpark. So this may be a carbon fiber one. And they work really good because I've been rotating it for a long time, taking them out, and there's no problems. So that's the rear one. That's the rear one. Now on the front one, I've got 2.17, 2.10, 2.07, 2.08, 2.04, 2.15. Bottom line, keep the original shims. If you took the shims out, don't do what I did and just throw them in a bucket and then start fresh and put all twos in there. I started with all twos, and I started getting all confused. I couldn't turn the crank. I didn't know. 1 minute I was like, oh, okay, well, just put the shims in, you know, no problem. And then I was like, wait a minute. Am I going this way, or am I going this way? Am I going left to right, or am I going left to right to left? I don't remember. So those are the little things that you have to. Now, you know, there's 16 valves, so that's 16 shims, and in addition to that, two camshafts on each head. It takes an hour to remove and install a camshaft. It is a long time. So that's something to keep in mind. Then you have to test these cylinders at top dead center on each one. That's why it's 6 hours just to do one valve job or one clearance adjustment. If you get it wrong, you got another 6 hours added onto that. So, word of warning, I think this is the best graphical representation you can do. That it'll save you some time. Like I said, we're looking at maybe a week, you know, replacing everything and starting fresh. I couldn't get the crank to turn. I had to start somewhere, so there you go. Alrighty.